One of my favorite memories from childhood was walking up that dusty road that laid between our place and my Granny Tollett's. Truth is, I probably spent more time at her place than I did at my own. And if there was anything that Granny loved more than telling a story, it was telling a story while working in her garden. JD, now hush, child, and settle down. Grab that bucket and help me here in the garden. Well, anyhow, like I was saying, I reckon old Solomon was thinking about flower gardens when he said that there was a time for all things. After all, the Bible says that the good Lord walked in the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day, and that's the best time for seeing flowers. The cool of the morning and the cool of the evening. There's just as much difference between a flower with the dew on it at sunup and a flower in the middle of the day as there is between a woman when she's fresh from a good night's sleep and when she's cooking a 12 o'clock meal in a hot kitchen. You think them poppies are mighty pretty with the sun shining on them, but the poppy ain't a sunflower. It's a sunrise flower. And some evening when the moon's all full and there's a dew falling, now that's the time to see roses and to smell roses too. You come into my garden about the 1st of next November, child, some evening just as the sun's going down, and you'll see the white ones looking like stars and the yellow ones shining like big gold lamps at dusk. And when the last light of the sun strikes the red ones, they look like cups of wine. And some of them turn into colors that there ain't no names for. Yes, honey, there's a time and a season for everything. Flowers too, just as Solomon said. Just then, a small snake slithered across Granny's path, and Granny just gently nudged the creature along its way with her hoe and laughed as the snake disappeared on the other side of the fence. I never see a striped snake that I don't think about old Sam Amos and that day that he saw the snake. Now, it wasn't often that we got a joke on Sam, but his run-in with that old snake kept us laughing for many a days. Now, Sam was one of them big blundering men, and he was always giving Miley trouble, and even giving himself trouble just through pure carelessness. Now, don't get me wrong, he meant well, and Miley used to say that if what Sam did was even half as good as what Sam intended to do, that there would finally be at least one perfect man on God's earth. One of his careless ways was scattering his clothes all over the house. And Miley, she would scold and fuss about it, but Sam, well, he just got worse about it instead of better. But that all changed the day he saw the snake. And after that, Miley said there wasn't a more orderly man in the state of Tennessee. I recollect the way it all happened. You see, Sam was raising an embankment round one of his ponds, and Uncle Jim Matthews and Amos Crawford, they were helping him out. And it was a Monday morning, about the 1st of April, and the weather was warm and sunny, just the right kind to bring out snakes. And I reckon there wasn't anybody that hated a snake as much as Sam did. You see, he'd been scared by one when he was just a boy, and he never got over it. And he used to say that there was just two things that he was afraid of. One was Miley, and the other was a snake. Well, that morning, Uncle Jim and Amos got to the pond before Sam did. And Uncle Jim hollered out, "Well, Sam, we beat you this time." Uncle Jim never got tired of telling him what happened next. He said Sam ran up that embankment with his spade, and then he set it on the ground and put his foot on top of it to push it down, and the next minute, he gave a yell that you could have heard a half a mile away before he slung his spade over in the middle of the pond. They said he jumped 3 feet up in the air and ran down the embankment yelling and kicking and throwing his arms in every which direction. When at last he finally fell down on the ground a good distance from the pond, Amos and Uncle Jim was so taken by surprise that at first they just stood there and looked. But anyhow, they eventually ran up to him and they found him shaking like a leaf, with cold sweat streaming out of every pore and gasping while yelling out, "Take it away, take it away." And all the time he was throwing out his left foot in every direction. Finally, Uncle Jim grabbed hold of his foot, and there was a red and black necktie sticking out of the leg of his pants. He pulled it out and he said, "Why, Sam, what's your Sunday necktie doing up your pants leg?" They said that Sam looked at it in a foolish sort of way, and then he fell back laughing and crying at the same time. All the while, Amos was fanning him with his hat for pert near 5 minutes. When at last they finally got him in a fix that he could sit up and talk, and then Sam said, "Well, I took my necktie off last night and slung it down on a chair where my everyday pants were laying. And when I put my foot in my pants this morning, I must have carried the necktie inside. And by the time I got to the pond, it had worked its way down. And I thought it was a black snake with red stripes." Now, child, he couldn't even get up because his ankle was sprained. And then Uncle Jim said, "Well, no wonder, Sam. You jumped nearly 6 feet in the air when you saw that snake crawling out of your pants leg." Well, when they got him to the house and told Miley all about it, she said, "Now, Sam, I feel too sorry for you to laugh at you like Uncle Jim, but I must say, this wouldn't have happened if you'd have folded up that necktie and put it away in the top drawer." Well, Sam was just sitting there on the side of the bed rubbing his ankle, and then he gave a groan and said, "Well, things have finally come to a fine pass when a sober, God-fearing man like myself has to put his necktie in the top drawer to keep from seeing snakes." I declare to goodness, Granny Tollett laughed as she laid down her trowel and pushed back her calico sunbonnet. I never laughed so hard at Sam. Now, J.D., Sam Amos ain't nothing but a name to you, but child, to me, he's just as real as he hadn't been dead all these many years. And I find myself laughing over the things he used to do, just the same as if they had happened yesterday. And just then, Granny leaned over her beautiful rose, closed her eyes, and gently breathed in its sweet fragrance. Grandmother's rose, child. That's all the name it's got. And I reckon you think a fine-looking rose like this one ought to have a fine-sounding name. But I never saw anybody yet that knew enough about roses to tell me what the right name is. Maybe someday when I'm dead and gone, somebody will tack a fancy name on it. But as long as it grows in my garden, it'll just be Grandmother's Rose. And this is how it came about its name. You see, my grandfather and my grandmother were amongst the first settlers of Tennessee. They had come over the Wilderness Road and down through the Cumberland Gap, way back yonder, goodness knows when. Did you ever think, child, how curious it was for them men to leave their homes and risk their own lives and the lives of their little children and their wives just to get to a new country? It appears to me they must have been led just like Columbus when he crossed that big ocean in his little ships. I reckon if the women and children had had their way about it, the bears and the wildcats and the Indians would still be here. But a man, well, he goes where he pleases, and a woman's just got to follow. And that's the way it was when grandfather and grandmother came over. I heard my mama say that grandmother cried for a week when she found out that she had to make the journey. And every now and then she would sob out, "I wouldn't mind it so much if I could take my garden with me." Well, anyhow, when they began packing up their things, my grandmother took up this rose and she put it in an iron kettle and laid out plenty of good, rich earth around the roots. My grandpa said that the load they had to carry was plenty heavy enough without putting in useless things. But Granny just told him, "If you leave this rose behind, well, you can leave me too." So the kettle and the rose went, and for 4 long weeks they were on their way. And every time they'd come to a creek or a river or a spring, grandmother would water the rose. And when they finally got to their journey's end, before they ever even chopped a single tree or laid a stone or even broke ground, she cut the sod with an axe, and then she took grandfather's hunting knife, dug a hole, and planted this rose. Now grandfather, he cut some limbs off a beech tree and drove them into the ground all around it to keep it from being trampled down. And when that was done, grandmother said, "Now build the house so this rose will stand on the right-hand side of the front walk. And maybe I won't die of homesickness if I can step out my front doorstep and see one flower from my old Virginia garden." Well, as it turns out, she didn't die of homesickness, nor did the rose either. The transplanting was good for both of them. She lived to be 90 years old, and when she died, the house wouldn't hold all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that had come to see her funeral. And here's her rose, still growing and blooming yet. And every spring, I gather a basket full of these pink roses, and I lay them on her grave over yonder in the old burial ground. Some folks have family china and family silver that they're mighty proud of. Martha Crawford used to have a big blue and white bowl that had belonged to her great-grandmother, and she thought more of that bowl than she did anything else in the house. Miley Amos had a set of spoons that had been in her family for 4 generations, and they were even too precious to use. But me, well, I've got my family Rose, and it's just as dear to me as that china and silver are to other folks. Well, I recollect after my father died and the estate had to be divided up, my sister Mary and my brother Joe and the rest of them was laying claim to the claw-footed mahogany table and the cherry sideboard and such things as that. And finally my brother turned to me and said, "Is there anything you want? If there is, you better speak up and make it known." And honey, I said, "The rest of you can take whatever furniture you want. As for me, there's only one thing I want, and that's my grandmother's rose bush." That very evening, I showed your Papa Coy where I wanted the rose to stand, and he dug way down into the clay. Oh, there's nothing a rose likes better, child, than good red clay. And then he went and got a wheelbarrow load of soil from the woods, and we put that in first, and we set the roots in it and packed them good and firm. First with the wood soil, then with the clay, watering it all the time. And when we got through, I said, "Now you pretty little thing, you, if you could come all the way from Virginia in an old iron kettle, surely you won't mind being moved to my garden." I smiled as I took a long look at the beautiful rose and pondered its rich history as Granny continued. "Now you shouldn't laugh, child. That rose knew just what I said, and it did just what I told it to do. It looked like everything favored us, because it was early in the spring and things were just beginning to put out leaves, and the next day was cloudy and cool, and then it began to rain. It rained for 36 hours, and when the sun came out, so did grandmother's rose. Not a leaf on it ever withered, and me and my children and my children's children have gathered flowers from it all these years. Folks say I'm foolish about it, and I reckon I am, but I've outlived most of the people I love, and I don't want to outlive this rose. We've both weathered many a hard winter, and 2 or 3 times it's been winter killed clean to the ground, and I thought I'd lost it. Honey, it was like losing a child to me, but there's never been a winter yet hard enough to kill the life that lives in this rose's roots, and I trust there never will be as long as I live, for spring wouldn't be spring to me without my grandmother's rose." Granny, besides grandmother's rose, what's your favorite flower? It appears to me, child, you ought to know that without asking. Just look around. Have you ever seen so many daffodils in one place before? No, and you never will. I've been planting that flower every spring for 60 years, and I've never gotten too many of them yet. Now, I used to call them Johnny Jump-Ups. That was before someone told me their right name was Daffodil. But Johnny Jump-Ups suits them best, for it kind of tells how they come up in the spring. You take tulips. Well, they hang back until they know it'll be warm and comfortable enough outside. But these daffodils, well, they don't wait for anything. Before the snow's gone, you'll see their leaves pushing up through the cold ground, and the buds come hurrying right along, trying to keep up with the leaves. Just like they knew the little children and old women like me was waiting and longing for them. I've seen these flowers blooming and the snow falling over them in March, and they didn't mind it a bit. Well, I got my start of daffodils from my mama's garden, and every fall I'd divide the roots up and scatter them till I got the whole place pretty well sprinkled. But the biggest part of them came from the old Harris farm, 3 or 4 miles down the road. Now, 40 years ago, that farm was sold, and the man that bought it, where he tore things up all scandalous. Now, he called it remodeling, but as I recollect, it looked more like ruining to me. Now, old lady Harris, she was like me. She couldn't get enough of those yellow flowers, and she had a double row of them all around her garden, and they'd gone through the fence, and they'd come up in the cornfield, and whoever plowed that field had to be careful not to touch them daffodils. Well, as soon as that new man got possession, he began plowing up the garden, and one evening the news came to me that he was throwing away all those Johnny Jump-Ups by the wagon load. Well, I put on my sunbonnet, and I went out there where your papa was working in the field, and I said, "Coy, you've got to stop plowing and put the horse to the spring wagon and take me over to the old Harris place. I hear they're plowing up old lady Harris's garden and throwing the flowers away, and I want to go over and get a wagon load of those Johnny Jump-Ups." Your papa, he just looked at me a minute like he thought I was losing my senses. But, of course, he gave in when he saw how much I really wanted those flowers. But that didn't stop him from breaking out laughing a time or two while he was hitching up, and he said, "Honey, don't tell any of the neighbors that I stopped plowing to go after a load of Johnny Jump-Ups." Well, anyhow, when we got to the Harris place, we found those Johnny Jump-Ups laying in a gully by the side of the road. It was a pitiful sight to anyone who loves flowers and understands their feelings. We loaded up the wagon with those poor things, and as soon as we got home, Coy took his hoe and made a little trench all around my garden, and I set out all of these Johnny jump-ups. Just then, Granny looked out into the distance. You see that row of daffodils over yonder by the front fence, with all those leaves and no blossoms? I looked in the direction of her pointing finger, and I saw a long line of flowerless plants, standing like sad and silent guests at the festival of spring. Well, child, it's been 6 years since I set 'em out there, and not a single flower have they had in all that time. Some folks say it's because I moved them at the wrong time of the year. But as I recollect, that same week I moved some of these same flowers from my yard to Elizabeth Crawford's. And Elizabeth's, well, they bloom every year, so it can't be that. Other folks said I placed it in a place that was too shady. But look right there. I put them where the sun strikes on them until it sets, and they still won't bloom. It's my opinion, honey, that they're just homesick. And I believe if I was to take them daffodils back to Miss Harris's place and plant them in the border where they used to grow, alongside of the sage and the lavender and the thyme, well, they'd go back to blooming, just like they used to. Now, you shouldn't laugh, child. Look at that vine yonder, taking hold of everything that comes in its way, just like a little child learning to walk. And you see that pink rose over by the fence? Well, that rose didn't do anything but put out leaves for the first 2 years I had it. Now, a bud might come once in a while, but it would blast before it was half open. And finally I said to it, "What is it that you want, honey? Is there something that doesn't please you? Maybe you don't like the place you're planted in, next to these honeyhawks and lilies for neighbors." So one day I took it up and I set it between some white tea flowers, and it went to blooming right away. It just didn't like the neighborhood it was in. And there's my roses. Just look at them. Every color a rose could possibly be, and pert near every kind there is. You would think I'd be satisfied. But there's one rose I lost 60 years ago, and the recollection of that rose keeps me from being satisfied with all I've got. It grew in old Lady Elroyd's garden, and nowhere else. And there ain't a rose here except my grandmother's rose that I wouldn't give up forever if I could just find that rose again. I've tried many a time to tell folks about that rose, but somehow I can't get hold of the right words. Well, I reckon an old woman like me, with little or no book learning, couldn't be expected to tell how that rose looked, any more than she could be expected to draw it or paint it. I can say that it was yellow, but that word yellow don't tell the color of that rose. I've got all shades of yellow in my garden, but nothing like the color of that rose. It got deeper and deeper towards the middle, and looking at one of them roses, half opened, was like looking down into a gold mine. The leaves crinkled and curled back towards the stem as fast as it opened, and the more it opened, the prettier it was. Just like some women that grow better looking the older they get. And when it comes to telling you how it smelled, I'll just have to stop right there. 'Cause child, there was never anything like it for sweetness, and it was a different sweetness from any other rose that God has ever made. I recollect seeing Miss Penelope come into church one Sunday, dressed in white with a black velvet girdle around her waist, with a bunch of these roses and buds and half-blown ones and full-blown ones fastened up in that girdle. And that bunch of yellow roses was the song and the sermon and the prayer to me that day. I couldn't take my eyes off of them. I always intended to ask for a slip of it, but I waited too long. It got lost one long, cold, bitter winter. And honey, that lost flower just haunts me. I guess I'm just like my grandmother, child, when it comes to my garden. I know one day I'll have to leave this world and journey into the next. And I often think about how John looked up into heaven and he saw the golden streets and the gates of pearl. But I noticed that he didn't say anything about gardens. Now don't get me wrong, I like what he says about no sorrow and crying and no pain, and even God wiping away the tears from our eyes. That's pure comfort. But if I could just have your Papa Coy and the children I've lost again, and all of us to be at my old home with the old garden, well, I'd be willing to give up those golden streets. Granny didn't say another word after that. She just stood there a spell, looking out over her garden like she was seeing more than flowers, like she was seeing the faces, the years, and whole lives folded up in bloom and leaf. The sun was sliding low beyond the ridge, and the air had the sweet evening smell of dirt and green things settling down for the night. Finally, she picked up her trowel again and she went back to work, humming so low I nearly couldn't hear her. I helped her till the light faded, and when it was time to go, I started back down that dusty road towards home. Behind me, Granny's garden glowed soft in the dusk. Roses, daffodils, and all them old flowers still holding on. And I reckon that's when I understood something that I didn't have words for yet. That love doesn't leave when people do, and there's nothing that's been planted with care that's ever truly gone. It just waits, quiet and patient, till someone remembers to come back and tend to it. As long as I live, whenever I catch the smell of roses or see a patch of yellow daffodils blowing gently in the breeze, I'm right back there again, a barefoot boy in Granny Tollett's garden, listening to the stories that never quit growing. Indeed, as always, Granny's stories hold a powerful message that I'll never forget. I hope you enjoyed traveling back in time with me today for this tale of long ago. And please let me know your thoughts and comments below. It's the single most important thing you can do to support this channel. And after a beautiful story about flowers, it's only appropriate to thank our sponsor for today's video. Check out how you can save 15% for some flowers in your garden. Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller. Today's video is sponsored by tnnursery.net. Family owned and operated in the heart of Appalachia, TN Nursery ships beautiful plants and trees all across America. Perennials, ferns, vines, trees, and much, much more. Click the link in the description to shop America's favorite garden shop for quality landscaping trees and plants. Get 15% off of your order by using promo code STORYTELLER at checkout.